The howling winter wind clawed at Mason Reed's weathered pickup as he inched through the blinding snowstorm. Most people would have stayed home on a night like this, but Mason wasn't most people. His shift at the town's only hospital had run late, and despite the weather warnings, he'd risked the treacherous drive back to his small cabin. His 8-year-old daughter, Lily, was waiting with Mrs. Hernandez next door, and Mason never broke a promise to be home. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The headlights of his truck cut weakly through the swirling whiteness, barely illuminating the road ahead. That's when he saw it. A luxury SUV tilted awkwardly into a snowbank, hazard lights blinking feebly against the storm. Most would have driven past, assuming help was already on the way. But Mason Reed was the kind of man who stopped always. He pulled over, the wind nearly yanking the door from his hands as he stepped out. Approaching the vehicle, he noticed the desperate face of a woman pressed against the window, her expression a mixture of fear and relief. When he knocked, she rolled down the window just enough to be heard over the howling storm. "Please!" she yelled, her voice nearly lost in the wind. "My children, we've been stuck for hours." Mason peered inside, spotting 2 small figures huddled together under a blanket in the back seat. Identical twin boys, no older than 4, their faces pale with cold. The woman, clearly exhausted and frightened, introduced herself as Eleanor Winters. Her expensive coat and the luxury vehicle suggested wealth, but money meant nothing in a blizzard. Nature was the great equalizer, and right now, this family needed help. "My name's Mason," he shouted over the wind. "I'm a nurse at Pinecrest Hospital. We need to get you and your boys somewhere warm. Now." The temperature was dropping dangerously low, and Mason recognized the early signs of hypothermia in the twins. The SUV had run out of gas, trying to keep the heater running. There was no time to wait for emergency services. The nearest town was 30 minutes away in good weather. Impossible in this storm. "My cabin is just 2 miles up the mountain," Mason called through the window. "I've got heat, food, and I know how to care for them." Elena hesitated for only a moment before nodding. The survival of her children outweighed any fear of a stranger. Mason helped transfer the twins, wrapped in their blanket, to his pickup's back seat. Elena climbed in beside them, her designer boots squelching in the snow. What should have been a 5-minute drive took nearly 20 as Mason carefully navigated the increasingly treacherous mountain road. By the time they reached his modest cabin, the twins were shivering uncontrollably. Inside, Lily and Mrs. Hernandez looked up in surprise as Mason burst through the door with 2 small boys in his arms, followed by their elegant but disheveled mother. "Lily, honey, I need you to help Mrs. Hernandez get some hot cocoa going," Mason said, his nurse training kicking in as he placed the twins gently on the worn couch near the fireplace. "These boys are very cold, and we need to warm them up carefully." While Mrs. Hernandez bustled about the kitchen, Mason checked the twins' vital signs. Elena watched anxiously, her perfectly manicured hands clasped tightly together. The contrast between her and Mason's humble surroundings couldn't have been more stark. Her designer outfit against his simple cabin, with its mismatched furniture and hand-knitted throws, evidence of a life built on necessity rather than luxury. "They're going to be okay," Mason reassured her, "but you all need to stay here tonight. The roads won't be cleared until morning at the earliest." Elena nodded, her eyes filling with tears of relief. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." She looked around at the small cabin, taking in the children's drawings taped to the refrigerator, the stack of medical textbooks on the coffee table, the single bedroom with bunk beds visible through a partially open door. "You live here with your daughter?" Mason nodded, a story of loss and struggle written in the simple gesture. "It's not much, but it's home." The twins, Ethan and Noah, began to warm up, their small bodies losing the dangerous chill. Lily, always quick to make friends, introduced herself and offered them her favorite stuffed animals. Mrs. Hernandez, satisfied that everyone was safe, reluctantly left to return to her own home next door, extracting a promise from Mason to call if they needed anything. As the night deepened and the storm raged on, Mason made up beds on the couch and floor with spare blankets and pillows. Elena watched him, noting the gentle way he tucked in all three children, kissing his daughter goodnight and checking the twins' temperatures one more time. A single father living on a nurse's salary in a remote mountain cabin. Yet there was a richness to his life that had nothing to do with money. What Mason didn't know as he finally settled into his own makeshift bed on the floor was that this snowstorm would change everything. Elena Winters wasn't just a wealthy woman with a luxury SUV. She was a woman with secrets, running from a life that was unraveling and about to make a decision that would intertwine her fate with Mason's in ways neither could imagine. And in the morning when Mason awoke, he would find only the twins still sleeping peacefully on his couch, and Elena gone, leaving nothing but a hastily scribbled note and two small boys whose lives were now in his hands. The snow had stopped falling by morning, leaving behind a pristine white landscape that glittered under the winter sun. Mason Reed woke with the first light, his body stiff from a night spent on the hard floor. His initial relief at seeing the blizzard had passed quickly faded when he realized Elena Winters was nowhere to be found. He discovered her note on the kitchen counter, written on expensive stationery, with a trembling hand. "Please take care of my boys. I can't explain now, but they're in danger if they stay with me. I'll come back for them when it's safe. Their names are Ethan and Noah. They just turned 4. I'm sorry." Mason read the words 3 times, disbelief giving way to concern and then anger. What kind of mother abandons her children with a complete stranger? He looked over at the twins, still, sleeping peacefully on his couch, their identical faces relaxed in slumber. They'd spent much of the night coughing, their small bodies fighting off the chill they'd endured in the stranded SUV. Lily appeared in the doorway of her bedroom, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Where's the pretty lady, Daddy?" Mason folded the note quickly. "She had to go, sweetheart. The boys are going to stay with us for a little while." "Like a sleepover?" Lily's face brightened. "Something like that," Mason replied, his mind racing through the implications. He'd need to call the police, of course. Child services would get involved. The boys would be placed in the system while authorities searched for their mother or other relatives. Having worked in healthcare for years, Mason knew exactly how that story often ended, especially for twins, who might be separated into different foster homes. The boys stirred on the couch, and one of them, Mason wasn't sure yet which was which, opened his eyes and immediately began to cry. "Mommy?" Mason moved quickly to the couch sitting beside the distressed child. "Hey, buddy. Your mom had to go take care of something important. She asked if you and your brother could stay with us for a little bit. I'm Mason, remember? And this is my daughter, Lily." The boy regarded him warily, his dark eyes, so like his mother's, filling with tears. "Want mommy?" he whimpered. "Bye." Now the other twin was awake, looking around in confusion. "Where are we?" he asked, his voice small but clearer than his brother's. "You're at my house," Lily announced, climbing onto the couch between them. "We have pancakes on Saturdays. Do you like pancakes?" The momentary distraction worked. Both boys nodded, though they still looked uncertain. "I'm Ethan," said the one who'd spoken in the clearer voice. "He's Noah. He doesn't talk as much as me." Mason nodded, filing away this first clue to telling them apart. "Well, Ethan and Noah, how about those pancakes while we figure things out?" The morning took on a surreal quality as Mason tried to Maintain a sense of normalcy for the children while making necessary phone calls. The local sheriff promised to send a deputy out once the roads were cleared. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The hospital granted Mason emergency leave. His neighbor, Mrs. Hernandez, arrived with extra children's clothes that her grandchildren had outgrown. The twins ate pancakes cautiously at first, then with increasing enthusiasm. They answered Mason's gentle questions with simple responses that revealed little about their circumstances. They lived in a big house with their mommy. Their daddy was gone away. They had a nanny named Ms. Patrice who made them eat vegetables. They didn't know their address or phone number. By afternoon, when Sheriff Davis finally arrived, Mason had made a decision that surprised even himself. "I want to apply for emergency foster placement," he told the sheriff after explaining the situation. Sheriff Davis, a weathered man in his 50s who had known Mason since he'd moved to Pinecrest 5 years ago, raised his eyebrows. "You sure about that, Mason? You've already got your hands full with Lily and your job at the hospital." "I'm a certified healthcare provider. I have a stable home, and they're already comfortable with me," Mason argued. "Those boys have been through enough trauma. They don't need to be thrown into the system and possibly separated," the sheriff sighed. "It's not that simple, and you know it. We need to try to locate their mother, any other family. There's protocols." "I understand that," Mason interrupted. "But in the meantime, they need somewhere stable to stay. Why not here?" What Mason didn't say was how those two little boys, with their solemn eyes and brave faces, had already worked their way into his heart. Or how, when Noah had accidentally spilled his milk and then flinched as if expecting punishment, something fierce and protective had awakened in Mason. Or how Lily had spent the morning showing the twins her toys and books, already treating them like the brothers she'd always wanted. Sheriff Davis agreed to make some calls, though he warned Mason not to get his hopes up. The system moved slowly, and there would be home visits, background checks, and mountains of paperwork. "We'll also need to investigate the mother's claims about danger," the sheriff added. "That SUV she was driving is registered to a corporate fleet belonging to Winters International. Mean anything to you?" Mason shook his head. "She introduced herself as Elena Winters, but we didn't exactly exchange life stories during the blizzard." After the sheriff left, promising to return the next day, Mason sat on the porch steps, watching the children build a snowman in the yard. Mrs. Hernandez had found snow boots and gloves for the twins, and Lily was instructing them on the proper technique for rolling snow. His phone rang, the hospital administrator returning his earlier call. Mason explained the situation again, requesting an extended leave of absence. "I can't just abandon these kids, Sandra," he said, watching as Ethan carefully placed pebbles for the snowman's eyes. "At least not until we know what's happening with their mother." There was a long pause on the other end. "You know we're short-staffed as it is, Mason. I can give you 2 weeks of family emergency leave, but after that..." "I understand," Mason replied, though he wasn't sure he did. How could he possibly resolve this situation in just 2 weeks? As he hung up, Noah looked up from the snow and waved shyly at Mason. The boy's face, so solemn and wary just hours ago, broke into a tentative smile that tugged at Mason's heart. Whatever happened next, whatever complications lay ahead, Mason knew he'd made the right choice in bringing these children into his home. What he couldn't know was that Eleanor Winters hadn't abandoned her sons on a whim or out of selfishness. She was running from something or someone that threatened not just her safety, but the twins as well. And the danger was far closer than any of them realized. That evening, after finally getting all 3 children to sleep, a process that involved 3 bedtime stories, 2 glasses of water, and multiple reassurances to the twins that they were safe, Mason collapsed onto the couch with his laptop. With determined fingers, he typed Eleanor Winters into the search engine, not sure what to expect. What appeared on the screen made him sit up straight. Eleanor Winters, 32, heiress to the Winters International fortune, one of the largest private technology firms in the country. Recent widow of Malcolm Winters, the company's founder, who was 40 years her senior and had died 6 months ago in what was ruled a boating accident. The twins were mentioned in several Society page articles as the Winters heirs, but it was the most recent article, dated just 3 days ago, that made Mason's blood run cold. Winters' widow flees after questioning in husband's suspicious death investigation. According to the article, new evidence had emerged suggesting Malcolm Winters' death might not have been accidental. Elena was not officially a suspect, but police wanted to interview her again. The piece quoted Malcolm's adult son from a previous marriage, Victor Winters, who had publicly accused his young stepmother of marrying his father for money and possibly being involved in his death. "She's taken everything," Victor was quoted as saying, "My father's company, his legacy, even control of the trust funds for those children, who, I might add, look nothing like my father." Mason sat back, his mind racing. Was this the danger Elena had mentioned? Was she running from murder accusations, or from Victor Winters himself? A soft sound from the doorway made him look up. Noah stood there in borrowed pajamas, clutching a stuffed bear Lily had lent him, his small face troubled. "Hey, buddy," Mason said gently, closing the laptop. "Can't sleep?" Noah shook his head, his lower lip trembling. "Come here." Mason patted the couch beside him. The boy padded across the room and climbed up, leaning against Mason's side with a trust that made Mason's throat tighten. "Is Mommy, you coming back?" Noah whispered, his first full sentence since arriving. Mason put his arm around the small shoulders. "Your mom wants to come back to you, Noah. I'm sure of that. Sometimes grown-ups have complicated problems they need to solve, but she loves you and your brother very much." Noah nodded, seemingly satisfied with this answer, and snuggled closer. Within minutes, his breathing had deepened into sleep. Mason carried the boy back to the makeshift bed beside his brother, tucking the stuffed bear under his arm. Looking down at the twins, so vulnerable in their sleep, Mason made a silent promise. Whatever Elena Winters was running from, whatever danger threatened these children, he would protect them for as long as they needed him. Over the next few days, a routine began to take shape. Sheriff Davis made his promised visit, bringing with him a social worker named Diane Porter, who conducted an initial assessment of Mason's home. Despite the cabin's modest size, she seemed impressed by the warm, loving environment Mason had created for Lily and now for the twins. "The emergency foster application has been expedited," she informed Mason. "Given the unusual circumstances and your medical background, I'm recommending temporary placement of Ethan and Noah Winters in your care while we investigate their mother's whereabouts and claims of danger." "What about the news reports?" Mason asked quietly after ensuring the children were out of earshot. "About Elena being questioned in her husband's death?" Diane's expression remained professionally neutral. "We're aware of the situation. That's part of why we're being cautious. These boys may need protection beyond what the standard system provides." The temporary placement became official 3 days later. Mason signed papers agreeing to care for Ethan and Noah Winters for an initial period of 60 days, with the understanding that the arrangement would be re-evaluated regularly. The hospital administrator reluctantly extended Mason's leave to match this time frame, though with the pointed reminder that his position couldn't be held indefinitely. It was a worry Mason pushed to the back of his mind as he focused on helping the twins settle into their new temporary home. Lily, for her part, had wholeheartedly embraced her role as big sister, helping the boys learn the routines of the household and proudly introducing them to her friends when Mason enrolled them in the local preschool. The twins, initially quiet and watchful, began to relax into the simple rhythms of life in the small mountain community. But at night, when the children were asleep, Mason would sit at his laptop searching for any news of Elena Winters. The story had taken on national interest, with some portraying Elena as a cold-blooded gold digger who had married an elderly billionaire only to murder him, while others painted her as a victim of her vindictive stepson's smear campaign. The truth, Mason suspected, lay somewhere in between. He'd only spent a few hours with Elena, but his instincts told him she genuinely loved her sons. The anguish in her eyes when she'd watched them suffer from the cold had been real. A woman who didn't care wouldn't have looked that frightened, that desperate. 1 month turned into 2, then 3. The temporary placement was extended. Mason returned to work part-time, arranging his shifts around the children's schedules. Mrs. Hernandez became an honorary grandmother to all 3 children, watching them when Mason was at the hospital and teaching the twins to make her famous empanadas. Spring melted into summer. The social worker's visits became less frequent, her reports consistently positive. The news cycle moved on from Elena Winters, though occasional updates would appear. Winters' widow still missing. Victor Winters takes control of company. Investigation into Malcolm Winters' death continues. Mason created files documenting the twins' development, keeping detailed records of their health, education, and emotional well-being, partly for the social workers, but also for Elena, if and when she returned. He saved the drawings they made, the photos of their first swim in the lake, their excited faces when they caught fireflies on warm summer evenings. Sometimes, when he watched Ethan and Noah playing with Lily in the yard behind the cabin, Mason would wonder if Elena Winters was ever coming back. And in the deepest, most private part of his heart, he wasn't sure what he hoped the answer would be. Because the truth was, Mason Reed, who had been raising Lily alone since his wife died, giving birth to their second child, a son who had also not survived, had somehow become a father of 3. And despite the financial struggles, the crowded space, and the lingering uncertainty, their makeshift family had found a harmony that felt meant to be. It was Ethan who first called him Daddy, the word slipping out naturally one evening as Mason bandaged his scraped knee. The boy had frozen afterward, his eyes wide with something like fear, as if he'd broken an unspoken rule. "It's okay," Mason had said gently, smoothing a hand over Ethan's dark hair. "You can call me whatever feels right to you." After that, both twins began using the term, first hesitantly, then with increasing confidence. Lily beamed each time they said it, as if her family expanding was the greatest magic trick in the world. By the time the 1-year anniversary of the blizzard approached, the temporary arrangement had evolved into long-term foster care. The authorities had exhausted their leads on Elena's whereabouts. The investigation into Malcolm Winters' death remained open but inactive. Victor Winters had legally challenged Elena's parental rights, claiming abandonment, but had shown no interest in taking custody of the twins himself. The social worker, during what had become her quarterly visit, broached the subject Mason had been both hoping for and dreading. "Have you considered adoption, Mason?" Diane Porter asked, watching as the children built an elaborate fort out of cushions and blankets in the living room. "It's been a year with no contact from the mother. The courts would likely terminate her parental rights at this point if petitioned." Mason's heart constricted. Wouldn't Victor Winters fight that? He's been battling for control of their trust funds. "Money is one thing, custody another," Diane replied. "Our reports show the boys are thriving with you. That carries significant weight." That night, after tucking the children into bed, all 3 now sharing the larger bedroom while Mason slept on a pull-out couch in the living room, he sat on the porch steps, contemplating the future. The mountain air was crisp with the promise of another winter, the stars brilliant overhead, the decision felt impossible. To seek adoption would mean legally severing the twins' ties to Elena, essentially declaring her gone for good. It would also mean potentially entering a legal battle with Victor Winters, a man with virtually unlimited resources. Yet not pursuing adoption left the boys in a state of limbo, their future uncertain. As Mason wrestled with these thoughts, a car appeared on the winding mountain road, its headlights cutting through the darkness. It was unusual to have visitors at this hour, especially unannounced ones. Mason stood instantly alert as the vehicle approached. It wasn't until the sleek black Rolls-Royce came to a stop in front of his cabin that Mason felt a jolt of recognition. He knew, before the driver's door even opened, who he would see. Elena Winters stepped out of the luxury car, looking both exactly the same and completely different as the woman he'd rescued from the blizzard 1 year ago. The designer clothes and perfect makeup were there, but her eyes held a new determination, a hardness that hadn't been present before. "Hello, Mason," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion visible on her face. "I've come for my sons." And just like that, the world Mason had carefully built began to crumble beneath his feet. The 5-year anniversary of what the children now called the Blizzard Day arrived with unexpected warmth for early February. Mason sat on the weathered deck behind the cabin, watching Noah teach Lily the proper way to shoot a basketball while Ethan meticulously arranged stones in a pattern only he understood. 5 years. Sometimes it felt like a lifetime. Other times, it seemed like only yesterday that he'd found an SUV stranded in the snow, changing all their lives forever. The official adoption had been finalized 3 years ago, after a protracted legal battle with Victor Winters that had drained Mason's savings and pushed him to the brink of despair more than once. In the end, though, Elena's continued absence and Mason's undeniable bond with the twins had convinced even the most skeptical judge that this unconventional family belonged together. "Dad, watch this!" Noah called, dribbling the basketball. With surprising skill for a 9-year-old, he made a shot that bounced off the rim of the hoop Mason had installed on the side of the tool shed last summer. "Almost. Great form," Mason encouraged. "Keep your elbow in a little more next time." Life had found its rhythm in their expanded household. Mason had eventually accepted a promotion to head nurse at Pinecrest Hospital, the increased salary, helping to cover the costs of raising 3 growing children. They'd added a small extension to the cabin, nothing fancy, just enough to give the kids more space as they grew. Mrs. Hernandez still helped with childcare, though now she insisted. They call her Abuela Rosa, and the children had become as much hers as Mason's. Ethan, always the more introspective of the twins, abandoned his stone pattern and climbed onto the deck, settling beside Mason. "Dad, are we having the blizzard cake tonight?" he asked, leaning against Mason's side. "Wouldn't miss it," Mason replied, putting his arm around the boy's shoulders. The anniversary cake had become a tradition, a way to acknowledge their unusual beginning without dwelling on the mother who had vanished from their lives. Mason had kept his promise to document everything for Eleanor, though as the years passed, and the folders of photos and achievements grew thicker, he'd gradually stopped expecting her to claim them. The boys rarely asked about her anymore. The last time Noah had brought her up was almost a year ago, asking if Mason thought she might come to their school play. The hopeful uncertainty in his eyes had nearly broken Mason's heart. "I think we should invite Jackson and his mom this year," Ethan said thoughtfully, referring to his best friend from school. "They never get cake at their house." Mason smiled, his chest warming at Ethan's innate generosity, a quality so many children from troubled beginnings lost along the way. Both boys had emerged from their trauma remarkably whole, each with their distinct personalities, but sharing a resilience that continually amazed Mason. Noah was outgoing and athletic, making friends easily and approaching life with exuberant confidence. Ethan was quieter, more watchful, with an old soul's wisdom and a gift for understanding others' emotions that sometimes seemed almost supernatural. "That's a great idea," Mason agreed. "Why don't you go call them?" As Ethan ran inside to use the phone, Mason's gaze drifted to the narrow road that wound down the mountain toward town. 5 years, and still sometimes he found himself watching for a luxury car to appear, bringing with it complications and heartache he wasn't sure any of them could withstand now. The boys were no longer the traumatized 4-year-olds Elena had left behind. They were thriving, happy children with friends, hobbies, and a father who would move mountains for them. But they also had trust funds worth millions, managed by court-appointed trustees after Victor Winters had finally been removed from that role 2 years ago. Funds that would become available to them when they turned 18. And somewhere out there, they had a mother whose shadow still occasionally fell across their lives, no matter how Mason tried to protect them from it. The vibration of Mason's phone interrupted his thoughts. Glancing at the screen, he saw it was Diane Porter, the social worker who had overseen the twins' case and had become a trusted friend over the years. "Mason," she said when he answered, her voice holding an edge of tension he hadn't heard in a long time. "I need to give you a heads up about something." Mason's stomach tightened. "What's going on?" "I just got a call from the family court clerk. Someone's filed a motion to reopen the Winters adoption case." The world seemed to tilt beneath Mason. "What? Who?" But he knew, even before Diane confirmed it. "Elena Winters. She's surfaced, Mason, and she's claiming she never abandoned her children." Mason's grip on the phone tightened. "That's absurd. She left a note. She disappeared for 5 years without a single attempt to contact them. I know that. And you know that," Diane said calmly, though he could hear her frustration. "But she's hired Langford and Associates, one of the most aggressive family law firms in the state. They're arguing that she left under duress, fearing for her life and the lives of her children." "From who? Victor?" Mason asked, lowering his voice and glancing toward the house to make sure none of the children had wandered within earshot. "Presumably. The motion claims she's been in hiding all this time and that attempting to contact the boys would have put them in danger. She's also claiming she left them with you temporarily, with the understanding you would care for them until she returned, not that you would adopt them." Mason closed his eyes, fighting the wave of panic threatening to overwhelm him. "That's not what happened. You know that's not what happened." "I know," Diane said softly. "Mason, listen to me. The adoption is legally solid. You did everything by the book. Multiple attempts were made to locate her before parental rights were terminated. This is likely just a desperate attempt to regain some connection. Or to get control of their trust funds," Mason said bitterly. Diane was silent for a moment. "That's possible too. Victor no longer has his hands on that money, but as the boy's mother, Elena might have a claim. When will I need to appear in court?" "The initial hearing is next Thursday. Mason, you should get a lawyer. A good one." After hanging up, Mason sat motionless, his mind racing through the implications. Everything he had built, the family, he had pieced together from fragments of loss and hope, could be torn apart. He thought of the twins' faces if they learned their mother had returned, the confusion, the hurt, the impossible choice they might be forced to make. And Lily, his beautiful, compassionate daughter who had embraced her role as big sister with such wholehearted love. Would Elena try to separate the boys from the only sibling they'd known for 5 years? The thought was unbearable. "Dad?" Lily stood in the doorway, her expression concerned. At 13, she was becoming eerily perceptive, sometimes seeming to sense Mason's emotions before he'd fully processed them himself. "Is everything okay?" Mason forced a smile. "Just some work stuff, sweetheart. Nothing to worry about." Later that evening, after the anniversary cake had been eaten and the children were in bed, Mason sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad, making lists of attorneys to call, arguments to present, character witnesses to contact. He wouldn't lose his sons. He couldn't. The court date arrived with brutal swiftness. Mason had hired Patricia Coleman, a family law attorney with a reputation for being both brilliant and relentless. She had reviewed the adoption files and assured Mason that his case was strong, but had also warned him to prepare for an ugly fight. If Elena Winters has really been in hiding from danger all these years, where's the evidence? Patricia had asked during their preparation session. No police reports, no restraining orders, no documented threats. And why wouldn't she have contacted you, the person caring for her children, to at least check on their welfare? Now, sitting in the austere courtroom waiting for the hearing to begin, Mason tried to focus on these logical arguments rather than the knot of anxiety in his stomach. He'd told the children he had an important meeting, not wanting to burden them with the truth until necessary. Mrs. Hernandez, Abuela Rosa, had promised to keep them busy and distracted until he returned. The courtroom doors opened, and Mason's heart stuttered as a familiar figure entered. Elena Winters had aged well, her beauty more refined than it had been 5 years ago. Her dark hair was shorter now, cut in an elegant bob that framed her face. Her designer suit and the subtle gleam of expensive jewelry spoke of wealth still intact, despite her years in supposed hiding. Their eyes met across the room, and for a moment, Mason glimpsed something unexpected in her expression. Not a cold calculation he had imagined, but a flash of genuine pain, quickly masked by determination. She was accompanied by an older man in an impeccable suit, who Mason assumed was her attorney, the notorious Gerald Langford. As they took their seats at the opposite table, Mason leaned toward Patricia. "That's her," he whispered unnecessarily. Patricia nodded, her expression giving nothing away. "Remember, stay calm no matter what they say. The judge will be looking at your reactions as much as hers." The hearing began with formal introductions. Judge Maureen Reeves, a stern-faced woman in her 60s with a reputation for no-nonsense efficiency, looked over her glasses at both parties. "Let me be clear from the outset," she said. "This court's primary concern is the welfare of Ethan and Noah Winters. Not parental rights, not financial interests, not adult grievances, just those two boys." Langford rose smoothly. "Your Honor, my client has suffered an unimaginable injustice, forced to flee from her abusive stepson who had already arranged her husband's murder. She made the heartbreaking decision to temporarily place her children with Mr. Reed, a stranger who had shown kindness until she could secure their safety. Instead, Mr. Reed exploited her vulnerability to adopt her children and gain access to their substantial trust funds." Mason clenched his jaw so hard it ached. Patricia squeezed his arm in warning before standing. "Your Honor, these are outrageous and unfounded accusations. Mr. Reed has raised these boys for 5 years with no financial support from Ms. Winters. He had no knowledge of their trust funds when he took them in, and those funds remain untouched. In court-supervised accounts, Miss Winters left a note explicitly abandoning her children and made no attempt to contact them for 5 years. Not a phone call, not a letter, not even an anonymous message to confirm they were well." Judge Reeves listened impassively. "Ms. Winters, are you prepared to offer evidence of the danger you claim necessitated abandoning your children?" Elena stood, her composure perfect except for the slight tremor in her hands. "Your Honor, my stepson Victor Winters had already murdered his father, my husband, to gain control of the company. The police investigation was compromised by his influence. When I began gathering evidence against him, I received explicit threats against my children. I can provide documentation of these threats, which I've kept concealed until now for safety reasons." She opened a folder, removing several papers, which her attorney passed to the judge. Mason exchanged a glance with Patricia, who looked skeptical but concerned. "And why have you returned now?" Judge Reeves asked, examining the documents. "Because Victor Winters died 3 months ago," Elena said, her voice steady. "A heart attack. With him gone, the danger to my sons has passed. I came as soon as I confirmed it was safe." The revelation hung in the air. Mason hadn't known Victor was dead. The man had largely disappeared from their lives after losing control of the boys' trust funds. Judge Reeves studied the papers in silence, then looked up. "These appear to be email printouts and photographs that could constitute threats, but they will need to be authenticated. Ms. Winters, while I understand your stated concerns for your children's safety, I find it troubling that you made no attempt to monitor their welfare through official channels, through the courts, through a lawyer, through Child Protective Services." Elena's composed facade cracked slightly. "I was afraid any contact could be traced. Victor had resources, connections. I couldn't risk it." "And yet," the judge continued, "you left your 4-year-old sons with a complete stranger, with no way of knowing if they were safe or well cared for." "I researched Mr. Reed after the blizzard," Elena said, glancing at Mason. "I learned he was a nurse, a widower raising a daughter alone. I believed he would care for them properly until I could return." The statement stunned Mason. Had she really investigated him before leaving the twins? The idea that the abandonment had been calculated rather than impulsive somehow made it worse. Judge Reeves set the documents aside. "I'm not prepared to make any determinations today. These allegations need to be investigated, and most importantly, I need to understand how the children themselves are faring." She looked directly at Mason. "Mr. Reed, the court will appoint a guardian ad litem to evaluate the children in their home environment. Ms. Winters, you will need to submit to psychological evaluation before any visitation can be considered." The judge scheduled another hearing for 3 weeks later and adjourned the session. As Mason gathered his papers, he felt Elena's approach before he saw her. Her perfume, expensive and subtle, reached him first. "Mason," she said softly, "may I speak with you privately?" Patricia stepped between them. "All communication should go through counsel, Ms. Winters." Elena's eyes remained fixed on Mason's face. "Please, 5 minutes. I owe you an explanation." Against his better judgment, and ignoring Patricia's warning. "Look," Mason nodded. 5 minutes in the hallway." They stood in a quiet corner of the courthouse corridor, an uncomfortable distance between them. Up close, Mason could see the fine lines around Elena's eyes that hadn't been there 5 years ago. The subtle shadows beneath skillfully applied makeup. "Thank you for caring for them," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They look happy in the photographs I've seen." "They are happy," Mason replied, unable to keep the edge from his voice. "Or they were, until now." Elena flinched slightly. "I never wanted to leave them. You have to believe that." "Do I?" Mason crossed his arms. "You left 2 traumatized 4-year-olds with a stranger and disappeared for 5 years. Whether or not Victor was threatening you, there were other options." "Like what?" The polished veneer slipped, revealing a flash of anger. "Go to the police who were already suspicious of me. Enter witness protection with 2 small children, constantly. Looking over my shoulder, Victor would have found us. He nearly found me several times as it was." Mason studied her face, trying to reconcile this woman with the desperate mother he'd rescued from the blizzard. "What do you want now, Elena? Really?" Her expression softened. "I want to know my sons. I've missed 5 years of their lives. I'm not trying to take them from you, Mason. I just want to be part of their world again." "And the trust funds? Are those part of what you want too?" Elena's eyes flashed. I don't need their money. Malcolm left me well provided for, despite Victor's attempts to cut me out. This isn't about money. Mason wanted to believe her. Some deep instinct told him her pain was genuine, her desire to reconnect with her son's real. But he couldn't risk the boy's well-being on instinct. If you really care about Ethan and Noah, he said carefully, you'll approach this slowly. They've been through enough trauma. They're stable. They're thriving. Dropping back into their lives and creating confusion about where they belong, that could do real damage. Elena looked away, blinking rapidly. I've thought of them every day, every single day for 5 years. I know I don't deserve forgiveness for leaving them, but they're still my children. They're my children too, Mason said, his voice soft but firm. I've raised them, loved them, been there for every nightmare, every fever, every triumph and disappointment. I'm not their biological father, but I am their dad. Something shifted in Elena's expression, recognition perhaps, or resignation. She nodded slowly. I understand, but please don't poison them against me before they've had a chance to know me. I would never do that, Mason said honestly. Whatever happens between us legally, I won't speak badly of you to them. His phone vibrated in his pocket, a text from Abuela Rosa. Boys asking when you'll be home. Lily made cookies to cheer you up. She knows something's wrong. Mason showed the phone to Eleanor, perhaps a bit cruelly. I need to get home to our children. The flash of pain in her eyes was unmistakable, but she composed herself quickly. Of course. Thank you for talking with me. As Mason walked away, her voice stopped him once more. Mason, what are they like now? Please, just tell me something about them. He hesitated, then turned back. Noah plays basketball and wants to be a doctor when he grows up. Ethan draws constantly and can name every constellation in the night sky. They both hate Brussels sprouts, but will eat any other vegetable. They're kind to other kids, especially those who struggle. They're amazing boys. Elena's smile was genuine, if tinged with sadness. Thank you. The drive home gave Mason time to process the encounter. Elena wasn't the heartless abandoner he'd sometimes imagined during moments of anger, nor was she the helpless victim she portrayed in court. The truth, as usual, was more complicated. But one thing was clear. She wanted the twins back in her life, and Mason now faced the daunting task of explaining to Noah and Ethan that the mother they barely remembered had returned. When he arrived home, the cabin was filled with the scent of chocolate chip cookies. The 3 children were at the kitchen table, playing a board game with Abuela Rosa, laughter filling the room. The sight pierced Mason's heart. Lily noticed him first, her smile fading as she read his expression. Dad? What happened? Mason took a deep breath. I need to talk to you all about something important. The Guardian ad litem arrived exactly on schedule the following Tuesday afternoon. Rachel Kim was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who had spent 20 years advocating for children in the court system. Mason had prepared the kids as best he could, explaining that Ms. Kim needed to talk with each of them privately and observe their home life. What he hadn't fully prepared them for was the reason. He'd told the twins that their birth mother had been located and wanted to reconnect with them, but had downplayed the legal challenge to their adoption. Lily, older and more perceptive, had figured out more than he'd said, her worried eyes following him around the house. Beautiful spot, Rachel commented as Mason showed her around the property. Peaceful. Mason nodded. The kids love it here. Plenty of space to explore, close. Enough to town for school and activities, but far enough out to see the stars clearly at night. Rachel made notes on her tablet. How would you describe your parenting style, Mr. Reed? Structured but flexible, Mason answered honestly. The kids have chores, homework expectations, screen time limits, but I try to adapt to their individual needs. Ethan needs more quiet time than Noah. Lily's getting older, so she's earning more independence. And how have you addressed the twins' background with them? Their birth mother, their adoption. Mason gestured toward a shelf in the living room where several photo albums sat. I've kept those for them. Pictures, school reports, artwork from when they first came. I've never hidden that they were adopted or that their mother left them with me during the blizzard. They know she couldn't take care of them, but I've never vilified her. Rachel nodded approvingly. And their heritage? The Winters family background? They know their birth father was wealthy and died before I met them. They know they have trust funds for college and beyond. But I've tried to raise them with the values that matter to me. Kindness, honesty, hard work. Money shouldn't define who they are. The interviews with the children took place in Mason's small home office. Lily went first, emerging 30 minutes later with a neutral expression that told Mason nothing. Noah bounced out after his session, apparently unfazed. But Ethan's interview lasted longer, and when he finally came out, his eyes were red-rimmed. Mason fought the urge to demand what Rachel had said to upset him. Instead, he gave Ethan a quick hug and sent him to join his siblings, who were playing basketball outside under Abuela Rosa's watchful eye. "He's a sensitive child," Rachel observed, watching through the window as Ethan gradually relaxed into the game. "He feels things deeply," Mason agreed. "Always has." Rachel tucked her tablet into her bag. "Mr. Reed, I want to be transparent with you. I've been doing this job for 2 decades, and I rarely see a blended family functioning as harmoniously as yours. These children are clearly thriving in your care." Mason felt a surge of hope. "Then you'll recommend maintaining the adoption?" Rachel's expression turned cautious. "It's not that simple. Legally, a biological parent who can prove they left children under duress, fearing for their safety, has a strong claim, especially when that parent has resources and can provide a good home." "But the boys barely remember her," Mason protested. "Uprooting them now would be traumatic, which is why I suspect the court will seek a middle path," Rachel replied. "Joint custody, perhaps, or a gradual reunification plan. It's rare for courts to completely sever a biological parent's rights when that parent is fit and willing to care for the child." The words hit Mason like a physical blow. Joint custody? With someone who lives where, drives what, has what kind of life? The boys have routines, friends, a sister they adore. Are they supposed to shuttle between 2 completely different worlds? Rachel's expression softened with sympathy. "I understand your concerns, Mr. Reed, and I'll note them in my report. But I'm obligated to consider all factors, including the biological connection." After Rachel left, Mason stood in the driveway watching the children play, his thoughts in turmoil. The possibility of losing the twins entirely seemed less likely now, but the idea of shared custody brought its own complications. Elena Winters lived in a world of wealth and privilege Mason couldn't begin to provide. What if the boys preferred that life? What if weekend visits became full-time residents once they were old enough to choose? "Penny for your thoughts," said a voice beside him. Abuela Rosa had approached quietly, her wise eyes studying his face. "I might have to share them," Mason admitted, nodding toward the boys. "Their mother wants back in their lives." Abuela Rosa clicked her tongue. "After 5 years? What kind of mother disappears for 5 years?" "One who claims she was protecting them from danger," Mason sighed. "Maybe she was. I don't know anymore." The older woman placed a hand on his arm. "Those boys are yours in all the ways that matter, Mason. No court, no birth mother can change that bond." Mason wished he could be as confident. That night, after the children were asleep, he sat on the porch steps, gazing at the star-filled sky. The same stars had watched over this mountain when he'd first brought Elena and the twins home during the blizzard. The same stars had witnessed 5 years of birthday celebrations, scraped knees, bedtime stories, and growth. Whatever happened? Next, those memories were real. That love was real, and Mason would fight with everything he had to protect the family they had built beneath these stars. The first supervised visit between Elena and the twins took place on a crisp Saturday morning at a neutral location, a family counseling center in town that specialized in reunification cases. Mason had spent the entire week preparing the boys, explaining that their birth mother wanted to see them, answering their questions as honestly as he could without biasing them against her. "Will she take us away?" Noah had asked, his usual confidence wavering. "No," Mason had assured him firmly. "This is just a visit. You live here with me and Lily. That's not changing." He hoped it wasn't a lie. Now, as he sat in an uncomfortable chair in the waiting area while Elena met with Ethan and Noah in a room down the hall, Mason found himself checking his watch every few minutes. The visit was scheduled for 1 hour, 37 minutes to go. "You're wearing a track in the carpet," Patricia Coleman remarked, glancing up from her tablet. She'd insisted on being present for this first meeting, though she remained in the waiting area with Mason. "Sorry," Mason muttered, forcing himself to sit. "I just keep thinking about every possible way this could go wrong." Patricia set her tablet aside. "Mason, I know this is difficult, but remember what Judge Reeves said. This is about what's best for the boys, not about your feelings or Eleanor's." The judge had surprised both sides by ordering a temporary arrangement. Eleanor would have supervised visitation rights while the court investigated her claims about fleeing from danger. The boys would remain in Mason's custody, but Elena would be allowed gradually increasing contact if the initial visits went well. It was better than Mason had feared, but far from what he'd hoped for. The possibility still loomed that Elena might eventually gain joint custody, or even primary custody, if she could prove she'd left the boys with Mason temporarily under duress. The door down the hall opened, and Dr. Hernandez, the family therapist overseeing the visit, stepped out, motioning for Mason to join her. His heart pounding, Mason crossed to where she stood. "How's it going?" he asked quietly. Dr. Hernandez, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, offered a reassuring smile. "Better than expected." The boys were understandably reserved at first, but they're beginning to engage. Noah's asking quite a few questions about where Elena has been. Ethan is quieter, but he's listening intently. "Are they upset? Confused?" "Curious, mostly," she replied. "Children are remarkably adaptable, Mason, and you've prepared them. Well, would you like to join us for the last 20 minutes? I think it might be helpful for them to see you and Elena interacting positively." Mason hesitated, then nodded. The thought of facing Elena across a room with the boys watching was daunting, but he would do whatever helped them process this complicated situation. Following Dr. Hernandez into the brightly decorated family therapy room, Mason immediately sought out the twins. They were sitting on a small couch beside Elena, who was showing them something on her phone. Photographs, Mason realized. Noah glanced up as Mason entered, his expression a mixture of relief and uncertainty that tugged at Mason's heart. "Dad!" Ethan scrambled off the couch and hurried to Mason's side, wrapping his arms around Mason's waist in a tight hug. Mason returned the embrace, meeting Elena's eyes over Ethan's head. Her expression was carefully neutral, but he caught the flicker of pain as she watched her son seek comfort from another parent. "Hey, buddy," Mason said gently to Ethan. "Everything okay?" Ethan nodded against his side. "Mom's showing us pictures of when we were babies." Mom. The word struck Mason like a physical blow, though he kept his face composed. Of course they would call her that. She was their biological mother. He'd always referred to her as such. When discussing her with the boys, but hearing it spoken aloud so naturally still hurt. "That's great," Mason managed, guiding Ethan back toward the couch. "I'd like to see those too, if that's all right." Elena nodded, her movements slightly stiff. Of course. Mason sat on a chair opposite them, and for the next 15 minutes, they navigated an awkward but civil interaction. Elena shared stories about the twins as infants and toddlers, filling in gaps in their early history that Mason had never known. The boys listened with fascination to tales of their first steps, first words, the stuffed animals they'd favored. "You loved elephants, Noah," Elena said, showing him a picture of a chubby-cheeked toddler clutching a grey plush toy. "You wouldn't go anywhere without Ellie the elephant." Noah studied the photo with intense concentration. "I don't remember her." A shadow crossed Elena's face. "You were very young when we got separated." "Separated? Not when I abandoned you, not when I left you with a stranger for 5 years. Mason bit back the bitter thoughts. This wasn't about him or Eleanor. It was about the boys. Dr. Hernandez interjected smoothly, "Noah, Ethan, do you have questions you'd like to ask your mother?" The twins exchanged glances, communicating in that wordless way they sometimes did. Finally, Ethan spoke up, his voice soft but direct. "Why didn't you call us or write letters?" The question hung in the air. Elena's eyes filled with tears. She clearly struggled to contain. "I wanted to more than anything," she said carefully, "but there was a bad person who was trying to hurt us, and I was afraid he would find you if I contacted you. I had to stay away to keep you safe." "The bad man who hurt Grandpa Malcolm?" Noah asked, surprising Mason with his insight. Elena nodded. "Yes, my stepson, Victor. Your grandfather Malcolm's son from his first marriage." "Is he still trying to hurt us?" Ethan asked, shifting closer to Mason unconsciously. "No," Elena assured him. "He can't hurt anyone anymore. That's why I could finally come find you." "Because he's dead," Noah stated bluntly. Elena looked startled, then nodded. "Yes." Mason wondered how much the boys had overheard of his conversations with Patricia or Diane, more than he'd realized, evidently. As the visit concluded, Dr. Hernandez explained that they would meet again next Saturday, and if all continued to go well, the visits might extend to include outings together. The boys seemed relieved when Mason confirmed he would be picking them up from each visit, at least for now. Elena knelt to say goodbye to the twins, her composure finally slipping as she embraced them. "I've missed you both so much," she whispered. "I love you." The boys accepted her hugs somewhat stiffly, but didn't pull away. Progress, of a sort. In the parking lot afterward, Mason helped the twins into his truck, conscious of Elena watching. From the counseling center's entrance, as he started the engine, Noah spoke up from the back seat. "Dad, is she going to be our mom now?" Mason's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "She's always been your biological mom, buddy. But I'm still your dad, and you still live with me and Lily. What's happening now is that she wants to get to know you again, and you're getting to know her." "But we already have a family," Ethan said, his voice small, "with you and Lily and Abuela Rosa." Mason's throat tightened. "Yes, you do. And nothing changes that. Sometimes families just expand a little." He hoped that would remain true. The alternative, that this was the beginning of the end of the family they had built, was too painful to contemplate. The next 2 months brought more visits, each a little longer than the last. Dr. Hernandez reported that the boys were developing a cautious relationship with Elena, asking more questions about their early years, gradually opening up to her. After the 4th visit, supervised outings were approved, trips to the park, lunch at a restaurant, an afternoon at the Children's Museum. Mason forced himself to be supportive, to speak positively about Elena to the twins, to ensure they never felt caught between their parents. It was the hardest thing he'd ever done. Lily, for her part, watched the situation with growing concern. One evening, after the twins had gone to bed, she found Mason on the porch and sat beside him, drawing her knees up to her chest. "Dad." You going to lose Ethan and Noah?" Mason put his arm around her, pulling her close. "I'm doing everything I can to make sure that doesn't happen, sweetheart. But it might." It wasn't a question. Mason sighed. Lily was too perceptive to be fooled by false assurances. "The court is trying to figure out what's best for the boys. Their birth mother has legal rights, but so do I, as their adoptive father." Lily leaned against him. "They belong with us. They're our family." "Yes, they are," Mason agreed. "And no matter what happens legally, that will always be true." The custody hearing was scheduled for late August, giving all parties time to gather evidence and prepare testimony. Mason's legal team had been working diligently, interviewing the boys' teachers, their pediatrician, neighbors who had watched them grow, all to demonstrate the stable, loving environment Mason had provided. Elena's team was building a different narrative, a devoted mother forced to make an impossible choice to protect her children, who had spent 5 years in hiding while gathering evidence against her murderous stepson. She had, they claimed, always intended to return for her sons once it was safe. The evidence she'd presented to support this claim was substantial but circumstantial, threatening emails from Victor that could have referred to business matters rather than physical harm, security camera footage showing someone resembling Victor near her temporary residences in various cities, financial records showing how he'd attempted to cut her off from resources. 2 weeks before the hearing, Mason received an unexpected call from Patricia Coleman. "Elena Winters wants to meet with you," she said without preamble. "Just the two of you off the record." Mason frowned. "Why?" "She wouldn't say, just that it's important and pertains to the custody case." "Is this some kind of trap?" Patricia sighed. "I don't think so. Langford doesn't know about the request. She contacted me directly. That suggests she wants to discuss something her attorney might not approve of." Mason considered this. "When and where?" "Tomorrow evening. She suggested the lookout point up on Miller's Ridge. Said you would know it." Mason did know it. It was a scenic overlook about halfway between his cabin and town, offering spectacular views of the valley below. A public place, but often deserted in the evenings. "I'll be there," he said finally. The next evening, Mason arrived at the lookout point early, parking his truck and walking to the wooden railing that prevented visitors from getting too close to the edge. The view was spectacular. The small town of Pinecrest nestled in the valley, surrounded by forests and mountains, the setting sun casting everything in golden light. He heard the purr of a luxury engine before he saw the car, a sleek black sedan that pulled into the small parking area. Elena emerged, dressed more casually than he'd seen her since the blizzard. Slim jeans, a simple blouse, hair pulled back, in a ponytail. She looked younger, less like the polished society widow, and more like the woman he'd pulled from a snowbank 5 years ago. "Thank you for coming," she said, approaching to stand beside him at the railing. Mason nodded, waiting for her to explain why they were there. Elena gazed out at the view for a long moment. "It's beautiful here, peaceful. I can see why you chose to raise your daughter in this place." "Why did you want to meet, Elena?" Mason asked, not unkindly but directly. She turned to face him. "I wanted to talk without lawyers, without therapists, without anyone recording every word. Just you and me, discussing what's best for Ethan and Noah." Mason studied her face, noting the shadows under her eyes, the tension in her shoulders. "All right, I'm listening." "I've watched you with them," she said quietly. "Over these past months, you're a wonderful father, Mason, better than I could have hoped for when I left them with you." He wasn't sure how to respond to that. You didn't seem right given the circumstances." Elena continued. "They love you. That's clear in every interaction, every look. You've given them stability, security, a real childhood despite everything." "I love them," Mason said simply. They're my sons." "Yes," Eleanor agreed, surprising him. "They are, and that's why this is so difficult." She turned back to the view, her knuckles white where she gripped the railing. "If we go through with this hearing, it will get ugly. My lawyers will attack your parenting, your finances, your lifestyle. Your lawyers will portray me as a heartless mother who abandoned her children. The boys will be interviewed, questioned, made to feel like they have to choose. It will hurt them, Mason, deeply." Mason's jaw tightened. "I know. But what's the alternative? I can't just give them up. I won't." "I'm not asking you to," Elena said quietly. Mason turned to her in surprise. "What?" "I've done a lot of thinking over these past months, watching how the boys interact with you, with your daughter, seeing the life you've built for them." She took a deep breath. "I want to withdraw my petition for primary custody." Mason stared at her, certain he'd misheard. "You what?" "I want to propose a different arrangement, one that doesn't involve courts or lawyers or judges deciding our children's fate." She met his gaze directly. "Joint legal custody, with the boys continuing to live primarily with you. I would have regular visitation, gradually increasing as they become more comfortable. We would make major decisions together, education, medical care, that sort of thing." Mason felt as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet. "Why?" he asked, unable to keep the suspicion from his voice. "After all this legal maneuvering, why give up now?" Elena's eyes filled with tears. "Because I've been watching my sons pull away from me every time a court date approaches. Because I see how they look at you, not with the wary affection they're beginning to show me, but with complete trust and love. Because the most important thing isn't getting them back, it's making sure they're happy and secure." She wiped at her eyes. "And because, as much as it kills me to admit it, they already have a family. You, Lily, that wonderful woman they call abuela. Taking them away from that would be cruel, no matter what my legal rights are." Mason watched her, searching for any sign of deception or hidden agenda. All he saw was a mother in pain, making perhaps the most difficult decision of her life. "What about the trust funds?" he asked, needing to be sure. "Victor's accusations that you wanted control of the money?" Elena laughed bitterly. "I have more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes, Mason. Malcolm made sure of that. The boys' trust funds are rightfully theirs to access when they're adults. I have no interest in controlling that money." Mason exhaled slowly, processing this unexpected development. "Have you discussed this with your attorney?" "Not yet," she admitted. "Gerald would be furious. He doesn't like to lose, and he thinks we have a strong case. But this isn't about winning. It's about doing what's right for Ethan and Noah. And if I agree to this arrangement, what then? Then we tell our attorneys to draw up a custody agreement reflecting these terms. We present it to the court as a joint proposal. Judge Reeves seemed reasonable. I think she'd approve it if we're both in agreement." Mason considered the offer. It was more than he'd dared hope for. The boys would stay with him, in their home, with their sister. Elena would be in their lives, but as an addition to their family, not a replacement for it. "I'd need guarantees," he said finally. "Legal protection to ensure you couldn't change your mind later and try for full custody again." Elena nodded. "Of course. We can include language to that effect in the agreement." They talked for another hour as the sun set and stars appeared overhead, hammering out details of what a co-parenting relationship might look like. Eleanor had purchased a house in Pinecrest, she explained, to be close to the boys without uprooting them from their school and friends. She would be involved but not intrusive, present but respectful of the family Mason had created. As they prepared to leave, Eleanor hesitated, then spoke softly. "I need to thank you, Mason, not just for raising my sons when I couldn't, but for raising them so well, for loving them as your own. I don't think I could have left them with anyone better that night." Mason studied her face in the dim light of the lookout point. "Did you know?" he asked. "When you left them with me during the blizzard, did you have any idea you might not come back for them?" Elena closed her eyes briefly. "I knew there was a risk," she admitted. "I'd received a threat that morning, a message from Victor saying he knew where we were, that he was coming for us. When the car broke down in the storm, I thought it might be my only chance to get the boys somewhere safe before he found us." She looked at him directly. "I researched you afterward before I disappeared. Called the hospital, asked about you. They said you were their most dedicated nurse, that you'd raised your daughter alone after your wife died. I hoped, I prayed you would care for my boys if I couldn't return quickly." "You might have told me that," Mason said, unable to keep the edge from his voice. "Instead of leaving a vague note and vanishing." "I know," she whispered. "I've replayed that decision 1,000 times, wondering if there was another way. But I was terrified, Mason. Victor had already killed once. I couldn't risk leading him to the boys." Mason wasn't sure he entirely believed her story even now. But standing there under the stars, he found he no longer needed to. What mattered wasn't the past, but the future. The best possible future for Ethan and Noah. "I'll talk to Patricia tomorrow," he said finally. "If she agrees this is the best approach legally, we can move forward with the joint custody agreement." Elena smiled, relief evident in her expression. "Thank you." As they walked back to their respective vehicles, she paused beside her car. "Would it be possible? Could I see where they live? I've been curious about your cabin, the place they call home." Mason hesitated. Inviting Elena into their private space felt like crossing a boundary he wasn't sure he was ready to cross. But if they were going to co-parent, there would be many such boundaries to navigate. "Not tonight," he said gently. "The kids are already in bed, but maybe this weekend. You could come for lunch on Sunday, see the place, spend some time with all of us together?" Elena nodded, accepting this compromise. "I'd like that." Driving home, Mason felt lighter than he had in months. The cloud of potential loss that had hung over him since Elena's return had not dissipated entirely, but it had shifted, transforming from a threat into something more complex. A challenge, certainly, but one that might ultimately enrich the boys' lives rather than fracture them. When he pulled up to the cabin, he was surprised to see lights still on. Entering quietly, he found Lily at the kitchen table, a mug of cocoa in front of her, clearly waiting up for him. "How did it go?" she asked immediately. Mason smiled, dropping into the chair across from her. "Better than I expected." "Much better." He explained Elena's proposal in simple terms. She had recognized that uprooting the boys would hurt them, so she was suggesting an arrangement where they would stay with Mason while getting to know their birth mother gradually. Lily absorbed this, her expression thoughtful. "So we're not losing them?" "No, sweetheart. We're not losing them. Our family is just expanding a little, like I told the boys." Lily nodded slowly. She must really love them to do that. "I think she does," Mason agreed, somewhat surprised to find he genuinely believed it. "Is she nice?" Lily asked after a moment. "When she's not being all lawyery and scary?" Mason chuckled. "She can be, yes. You'll be able to judge for yourself on Sunday. She's coming for lunch to see the cabin and spend time with all of us." Lily's eyes widened. "She's coming here? To our house? Is that okay? I should have asked you first." Lily considered this, then squared her shoulders with determination that reminded Mason so much of her mother, it made his heart ache. "It's okay. The boys are my brothers. If she's going to be in their life, I should meet her properly." Mason reached across the table to squeeze her hand. "When did you get so grown up?" "When you weren't looking," she replied with a grin. The next day, Mason called Patricia Coleman to explain Elena's proposal. The attorney was initially skeptical. concerned it might be a legal maneuver to gain Mason's trust before changing. Tactics. People don't just give up when they think they have a winning case, Patricia argued, especially not people with Elena Winter's resources. I believe her, Mason said simply. I think she genuinely wants what's best for the boys, even if that means compromising her own desires. Patricia sighed. Let me talk to Langford, see if this offer is coming from both of them, or just Elena. If he's on board, we can start drafting a joint custody agreement that protects your rights. By Friday, the attorneys had confirmed that Elena was serious about withdrawing her petition for primary custody in favor of a joint arrangement. The preliminary agreement they drafted specified that the twins would continue living with Mason, with Elena having regular visitation that would gradually increase based on the children's comfort and the recommendations of Dr. Hernandez, who would continue to monitor the reunification process. Most importantly, the agreement included a non-modification clause stating that the primary residence arrangement could not be challenged for at least 5 years, barring evidence of abuse or neglect. It wasn't perfect protection, but it gave the boys time to settle into the new dynamic without fear of further disruption. Sunday arrived with clear skies and mild temperatures, perfect weather for Elena's first visit to the cabin. Mason spent the morning helping the kids clean up, though he deliberately left some of their artwork on the refrigerator, toys on the shelves, the general evidence of a home well lived in rather than staged for visitors. The twins were uncharacteristically quiet, watching from the window for Elena's car. Lily busied herself helping Mason prepare lunch, a simple meal of grilled sandwiches and homemade vegetable soup. Nothing fancy, but wholesome and filling. Do you think she'll like our house? Noah asked suddenly, his face pressed against the glass. Mason joined him at the window. I think she'll love seeing where you live, buddy, where you're happy. It's not fancy like her house probably is, Noah continued. No, Mason agreed, but fancy isn't always better. The rumble of an approaching engine drew their attention. Elena's black sedan appeared on the winding drive, moving carefully over the uneven ground. She parked beside Mason's truck and emerged, looking somewhat uncertain as she approached the cabin. She carried a large gift bag and wore casual clothes. Again, a simple sundress and flat sandals, appropriate for a family lunch rather than a formal visit. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, making her look younger, more approachable. Mason opened the door before she could knock, the twins hovering behind him, Lily a few steps back, watching with undisguised curiosity. Welcome, Mason said, stepping aside to let her enter. Elena's eyes swept the cabin's interior, taking in the cozy living room with its well-worn furniture, the kitchen visible beyond. Children's artwork framed on the walls. Her expression softened with something that might have been relief. Thank you for inviting me, she said, then knelt to greet the twins. Hello, Ethan, Noah, I brought you something. She offered the gift bag, which the boys accepted with cautious excitement. Inside, they found new sketch pads and professional quality colored pencils for Ethan, a youth-sized basketball and science kit for Noah, and, most touchingly, a handmade scrapbook filled with photographs of them as babies and toddlers, labeled with dates and brief descriptions of the moments captured. So you can know more about your early years, Elena explained gently. The boys thanked her politely, genuinely pleased with the thoughtful gifts. Then Elena straightened and turned toward Lily, who stood watching the interaction with assessing eyes. You must be Lily, Elena said warmly. I've heard so much about you from Ethan and Noah. They tell me you're the best big sister anyone could have. Lily blushed slightly but held her ground. They're the best little brothers, she replied, her tone making it clear this was both a statement of fact and a gentle warning. Elena seemed to understand the subtext perfectly. I can see that they are. You're very lucky to have each other. Mason guided everyone to the kitchen where lunch was waiting. The meal began somewhat awkwardly, but gradually the conversation flowed more naturally as the twins excitedly showed Elena their favorite spots in the cabin, the bunk beds they shared, the reading nook under the stairs, the collection of rocks and pine cones they'd gathered on hikes. After lunch, they moved outside, where Noah insisted on demonstrating his basketball skills, and Ethan proudly showed off the fairy garden he and Lily had created at the edge of the woods. Elena participated enthusiastically, asking questions, admiring their achievements, maintaining a careful balance of interest without pushing too hard for intimacy the boys weren't ready to offer. Watching her, Mason felt a complex mixture of emotions, residual wariness, yes, but also a growing appreciation for her genuine effort to fit into the boys' established life rather than disrupting it. She had opportunities to criticize or question his parenting choices, the cabin's modest size, the lack of expensive toys, the hands-off approach to supervision as the children played outside, but instead, she seemed to understand and respect the environment he'd created. As the afternoon lengthened into early evening, Elena helped the twins organize their new art supplies and basketball gear, then assisted in the kitchen as Mason prepared a simple dinner. Lily, initially standoffish, gradually warmed enough to show Elena her collection of gemstones and explain how she was saving for a rock tumbler to polish them. "I might know someone who could help with that," Elena offered. "I have a friend who's a geologist. She has all kinds of equipment for working with stones." Lily's eyes widened. "Really? That would be amazing!" It was a small moment, but significant. The first suggestion of what Elena might bring to their lives beyond the complications of her return. She had resources, connections, experiences that could enrich the children's world if offered as additions rather than replacements for what they already had. As twilight approached, Elena prepared to leave, kneeling once more to say goodbye to the twins. This time, their hugs were less hesitant, more natural. "I'll see you on Wednesday for our regular visit," she reminded them. "Maybe we can use some of those new art supplies." At the door, she turned to Mason, her expression sincere. "Thank you for today, for letting me see their home, meet Lily, be part of a normal day. It means more than I can say." Mason nodded, surprised to find he was glad she had come. "This is what co-parenting looks like, I guess. We're all figuring it out as we go." As Elena's car disappeared down the driveway, Mason felt Lily slip her hand into his. "She's not what I expected," his daughter said thoughtfully. "No," Mason agreed, "she's not." They stood together in the doorway, watching the last of the daylight fade from the sky, the familiar sounds of the twins bickering good-naturedly over a board game drifting from inside the cabin. For the first time since Elena's return, Mason felt something like hope. Not just that they would survive this upheaval, but that they might actually find a way forward that made their unusual family stronger rather than tearing it apart. 6 months after Elena's first visit to the cabin, the rhythms of their unusual family arrangement had begun to settle into something that felt almost normal. The joint custody agreement had been finalized, with the twins continuing to live primarily with Mason while spending every other weekend and one afternoon a week with Elena at her house in town. The autumn leaves had given way to winter snow, and now spring was painting the mountain with fresh color. Mason stood at the kitchen window watching as Elena helped the boys plant a vegetable garden in the patch of sunny ground behind the cabin. Her visits had gradually extended from carefully scheduled outings to more casual involvement in daily life, helping with homework, attending school events, and now contributing to the family's spring traditions. "They actually looked like they're having fun," Lily remarked, joining Mason at the window. At 14, she was growing into a thoughtful young woman, her initial wariness of Eleanor evolving into cautious acceptance. "They are," Mason agreed. He couldn't deny that Elena had proved herself genuinely committed to the boys' happiness. She never criticized the modest lifestyle Mason provided, never tried to lure the twins away with promises of luxury or extravagance. Instead, she'd found ways to complement what they already had, funding a basketball court at their school when she learned the old one was crumbling, quietly arranging for a renowned children's author to visit Noah's class when she discovered his growing interest in reading. "Are you going to marry her?" Lily asked suddenly, her directness catching Mason off guard. He nearly choked on his coffee. "What? No, why would you think that?" Lily shrugged, a knowing smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "She's here all the time. You guys don't fight anymore. And she's pretty." Mason set his mug down carefully. "Co-parenting doesn't mean romance, Lily. We're just trying to give the boys stability." "If you say so," Lily replied, clearly unconvinced. She grabbed her backpack from the counter. "I'm going to Katie's to work on our science project. Back by dinner." As the door closed behind her, Mason returned his attention to the scene outside. Elena was laughing as Noah explained something with animated gestures. Dirt smudged across his cheek. Ethan was meticulously marking rows with string and small wooden stakes, his face a picture of concentration. They looked like a family. The thought came unbidden, bringing with it a confusion of emotions Mason wasn't prepared to examine. The doorbell rang, pulling him from his thoughts. Opening the door, he found Sheriff Davis standing on the porch, his weathered face more serious than usual. "Mason," he nodded in greeting, "need a moment of your time." Mason stepped outside, closing the door behind him. "Everything okay?" The sheriff scratched his chin, looking uncomfortable. "Got some news you should know about. Victor Winters. Death might not have been natural causes after all." Mason frowned. "What do you mean?" "Medical examiner in Boston just flagged it for reinvestigation. Found traces of something that shouldn't have been there during a routine review of samples. Nothing definitive yet, but enough to raise questions." Mason's stomach tightened as he glanced toward the garden where Eleanor knelt beside the twins. "Why are you telling me this?" Sheriff Davis met his gaze directly. "Because Eleanor Winters was in Boston the week her stepson died. Credit card records confirm it. She stayed at a hotel 3 blocks from his apartment under a different name." The implication hung heavily between them. Mason shook his head. "That doesn't mean anything. She was in hiding, using different names everywhere she went." "Probably doesn't," the sheriff agreed. "But given the history between them and the fact that his death is what allowed her to resurface and reclaim her sons." He shrugged. "Thought you should know. Those boys are important to this community, to you." Mason's jaw tightened. Elena wouldn't... But he stopped, because the truth was, he didn't know what Elena would or wouldn't do. Despite the months of cautious cooperation, despite witnessing her genuine love for the twins, there remained a core of mystery about the woman who had abandoned her children in a blizzard and disappeared for 5 years. "Anyway," Sheriff Davis continued, "nothing may come of it. Just keep your eyes open." After the sheriff left, Mason remained on the porch, his thoughts in turmoil. Through the kitchen window, he could see Elena helping the boys wash their hands. At the sink, her movements gentle and maternal. Could she truly have orchestrated Victor's death? The woman he'd come to know over these past months didn't seem capable of murder. But then again, the Elena who had left her children with a stranger during a blizzard hadn't seemed capable of abandonment either. The door opened, and Elena stepped out, her expression curious. "Everything okay? The boys are asking for lunch." Mason studied her face, searching for any sign of the darkness Sheriff Davis had suggested might lurk beneath her polished exterior. All he saw was mild concern, perhaps a hint of the wariness that still occasionally arose between them, despite their improving relationship. "Just the sheriff checking in," he said finally. "Nothing important." Her eyes narrowed slightly, sensing The deflection, but she didn't press. Noah wants grilled cheese. Ethan is lobbying for quesadillas. Thoughts? And just like that, they were back to co-parenting discussions, the shadow of suspicion pushed aside but not forgotten. Later that evening, after Eleanor had gone home and the children were in bed, Mason found himself researching Victor Winters' death online. The news articles were sparse on details. A successful businessman found dead in his Boston apartment. Initial cause listed as heart attack, no signs of foul play. Nothing about a reopened investigation or suspicious substances, but that wasn't surprising. Such developments wouldn't be publicly announced until the evidence was more substantial. Mason closed his laptop, rubbing his tired eyes. He was letting the sheriff's insinuations get to him, searching for darkness where there might be none. Yet the timing was suspicious. Victor's death had so neatly removed the obstacle to Elena's return, allowing her to reclaim her place in the twins' lives. His phone vibrated with a text message. The boys left their science books here. I can drop them by before school tomorrow. Elena. Such a normal, mundane message from a woman he'd just been mentally investigating for murder. Mason shook his head at the absurdity of the situation. That would be great, thanks, he typed back. The next morning, Elena arrived just as Mason was serving breakfast. She handed over the forgotten textbooks, exchanged a few pleasantries, and was preparing to leave when Ethan asked an unexpected question. Mom, did you really run away because that bad man was trying to hurt us? The kitchen fell silent. Mason tensed, watching Elena carefully. Her expression flickered, surprise, pain, something else he couldn't identify, before settling into careful neutrality. Yes, Ethan, she answered softly. Victor was a dangerous person. I left to protect you both. But he never found us, Noah pointed out, milk mustache framing his serious expression. We were safe with Dad. You could have stayed too. Elena's hands tightened on the back of the chair she stood behind. It's complicated, Noah. Victor was looking for me specifically. I was afraid if I stayed, he would find all of us. Did you know he was going to die? Ethan asked, his voice smaller, almost a whisper. Mason nearly intervened then, the question too close to his own unspoken suspicions, but Elena was already answering. No, honey, I had no idea. Her voice was steady, her gaze direct as it moved from Ethan to Noah. His death was unexpected. When I found out, I was able to come find you without putting you in danger. The boys seemed satisfied with this explanation, returning to their cereal with the easy distraction of childhood. But as Elena left, Mason caught a flicker of something. In her eyes, a shadow, a weight that hadn't been there before. The suspicion gnawed at him throughout the day. During his shift at the hospital, he found himself distracted, second-guessing the trust he'd cautiously extended to Elena over these past months. By evening, he'd made a decision. After putting the children to bed, he drove to Elena's house. In town, her surprise was evident when she opened the door. Mason, is everything all right? The boys are fine, he assured her quickly. They're with Abuela Rosa. I needed to talk to you. Elena's elegant home was as different from Mason's cabin as she was from him. Sleek, modern furniture, original artwork on the walls, everything speaking of refined taste and wealth. Yet there were touches of warmth that had appeared since the twins began visiting. Photographs of the boys on side tables, a shelf of children's books, colorful artwork clearly created by Ethan, displayed proudly on the refrigerator. Would you like some tea? Elena offered, leading him to the living room, or something stronger. Tea is fine, Mason replied, though what he really wanted was answers. Once they were seated, steaming mugs between them, he decided on directness. Sheriff Davis came to see me yesterday. They're reinvestigating Victor's death. Elena's, and stilled momentarily as she lifted her mug. I see. Her voice betrayed nothing. He said you were in Boston when Victor died, staying near his apartment under a different name. She set the mug down carefully. That's correct. Mason waited, but she offered nothing more. That's it? That's all you have to say? Elena met his gaze directly. What exactly are you asking? Me, Mason? Did you have anything to do with Victor's death? The question hung in the air between them, stark and ugly. Elena didn't flinch, didn't look away. Would it matter if I did? Mason stared at her, shocked by the implicit admission. Of course it would matter. It would be murder. It would be justice, Elena countered, her voice soft but intense. Victor killed his father, my husband, to gain control of the company. He threatened my children. He forced me into hiding for 5 years, separated me from my sons during their formative years. So you did kill him, Mason stated, fighting to keep his voice steady. I didn't say that. Elena stood, moving to the window that overlooked her manicured garden. I was in Boston to monitor him, to gather evidence of his criminal activities that I could take to the authorities. I'd been tracking him for years, building a case. And he conveniently died of a heart attack while you were there. Elena turned, her expression unreadable. Medical examiners make mistakes. Sometimes a heart attack is just a heart attack. Is that what happened? Does it change anything about who I am as a mother? About my love for Ethan and Noah? She moved closer, her eyes never leaving his. If Victor was murdered, and I'm not saying he was, wouldn't it be understandable after everything he did? Mason stood, needing to create distance between them. Understandable isn't the same as right, and yes, it would change things. The boys are old enough to understand. If their mother became a suspect in a murder investigation, it would devastate them. There won't be an investigation, Elena said with quiet certainty. The medical examiner's concerns will be reviewed and dismissed. Victor had enemies more powerful than me, people with more reason to want him gone. The calm confidence in her voice chilled Mason more than an angry denial would have. How can you be so sure? Because I know things you don't. Mason, about Victor, about the company, about the world we inhabited. She sighed, something like regret crossing her features. I never wanted you dragged into this darkness. It's why I left the boys with you in the first place, to keep them far away from it all. Mason struggled to reconcile the woman before him, composed, reasonable, loving toward her children, with someone capable of orchestrating a man's death. Yet hadn't he always sensed there was more to Elena than the polished exterior she presented? I need to know, he said finally, for the boys' sake, for mine. Did you kill Victor Winters? Elena was silent for a long moment. No, she said at last. I did not personally kill Victor Winters, but I won't pretend to mourn him, and I won't apologize for the fact that his death made it possible for me to reunite with my sons. Mason studied her face, trying to determine if she was telling the truth. There was sincerity in her expression, but also a guardedness that left room for doubt. And if the investigation continues, if they find evidence pointing to you, they won't, she said simply, but if they did, I would protect the boys from it. I would disappear again before I let them suffer the trauma of seeing their mother accused of murder. The words sent a spike of fear through Mason's heart. You'd leave them again? Only if staying would hurt them more. Her voice softened. But it won't come to that. Trust me, Mason. Trust me. Such simple words, and yet so complicated between them. Mason had been gradually building trust in Elena as a co-parent, but this conversation had shaken that foundation. I should go, he said, moving toward the door. The kids will be wondering where I am. Elena followed him. Mason. She caught his arm gently. Whatever you believe about me, whatever you suspect, please don't let it affect what we've built. For the boys, they're finally adjusting to having both of us in their lives. Don't disrupt that. He met her gaze one last time. I won't say anything to them, but this conversation isn't over, Eleanor. It never is with us, is it? A sad smile touched her lips. That's been true since the blizzard. Driving home through the quiet streets of Pinecrest, Mason's thoughts were in chaos. Elena hadn't explicitly confessed to involvement in Victor's death, but she hadn't convincingly denied it either. Her words left room for interpretation. Perhaps she hadn't personally killed him, but had arranged for someone else to do it. Perhaps she hadn't killed him at all, but knew who had. Either way, she'd made it clear she believed Victor had deserved his fate. The cold pragmatism in her voice when she spoke of the investigation being dismissed had revealed a side of Elena that Mason had only glimpsed before. The calculating survivor who had navigated a world of wealth and power, who had made difficult choices to protect herself and her children. Was such a woman capable of murder? Absolutely. But she was also capable of fierce love, of sacrifice, of the genuine warmth she showed the twins. People weren't simple, Mason knew. They contained multitudes, contradictions, light and shadow intertwined. When he arrived home, Abuela Rosa was dozing on the couch, a mystery novel open on her lap. She stirred as he entered, eyes sharp despite her drowsiness. "The boys are asleep," she informed him. "Lily is in her room, probably still texting with that Katie girl." She studied his face. "Something is troubling you." Mason sank into the armchair across from her. "It's complicated." "Life usually is," she replied sagely, "especially when it involves beautiful widows with mysterious pasts." Despite his turmoil, Mason chuckled. Abuela Rosa had never fully warmed to Elena, maintaining a polite but watchful distance that Mason had attributed to protectiveness toward the children. Now he wondered if her instincts had detected something his own had missed. "Do you trust her?" he asked suddenly. "Elena, I mean." The older woman considered the question. "I trust that she loves those boys," she said finally. "The rest," as she shrugged. "Some people carry darkness inside them, Mason, not because they are evil, but because life has taught them that darkness is sometimes necessary for survival." It was a more nuanced answer than he'd expected, neither a blanket condemnation nor an easy absolution. "And if that darkness touched the boys, hurt them somehow?" Abuela Rosa's eyes hardened. "Then she would answer to me before she answered, to God." The fierce protectiveness in her voice reminded Mason why the children adored her so completely. "But I don't think she would ever intentionally harm them. Whatever she has done, whatever secrets she keeps, it has been to protect them. Of that I am certain." After Abuela Rosa left, Mason checked on the children, finding all three sleeping peacefully. Standing in the twins' doorway, watching the moonlight cast gentle shadows across their faces, he was struck by the weight of responsibility he bore. Not just for their physical safety, but for their emotional well-being, their sense of security in a complicated world. If Elena had indeed been involved in Victor's death, what was the right thing to do? Report his suspicions to Sheriff Davis, potentially, triggering an investigation that could traumatize the boys. Confront Elena again, demand a clearer answer, or accept her assurance that the matter would disappear, allowing their carefully constructed co-parenting arrangement to continue undisturbed. There were no easy answers, no clear path forward. All Mason knew with certainty was that he would protect Ethan and Noah with everything he had, from external threats, from harsh truths, even from their mother, if necessary. As spring blossomed into summer, Sheriff Davis did not return with further news about Victor Winter's death. Elena continued her regular visits with the twins, never mentioning their late-night conversation. Life settled back into its rhythms, the shadow of suspicion gradually receding, though never completely disappearing from Mason's awareness. One warm July evening, as fireflies danced in the gathering dusk, Elena stayed for dinner at the cabin, something that had become increasingly common. The children were playing a board game on the porch, their laughter drifting through the open windows as Mason and Elena washed dishes side by side. "They seem happy," Elena remarked, handing him a plate to dry. "They are," Mason agreed. "This arrangement is working better than I expected." Elena smiled, the genuine warmth in her expression a reminder of why he had gradually set aside his suspicions, choosing to focus on the present rather than the mysteries of the past. "Thank you for giving me a second chance with them," she said, softly. "Not many men would have been so generous after what I did." Mason set down the dish towel, turning to face her fully. "We all deserve second chances, Elena, even those of us with complicated pasts." Something flickered in her eyes, understanding perhaps that he had made a conscious decision to accept her as she was, without demanding confessions or explanations she wasn't prepared to give. "Even me?" she asked, her voice barely above, a whisper. "Especially you," he replied. "You're their mother. They need you in their lives." The moment stretched between them, laden with unspoken truths, mutual understanding, and something else, a connection neither had anticipated when they'd first met during a blizzard 5 years ago. From the porch, Noah's voice broke the spell. "Dad! Mom! Come see! I'm winning!" Mason smiled, setting down the dish towel. "Duty calls." As they stepped onto the porch together, joining the circle of light and laughter that surrounded their children, Mason felt a sense of peace settle over him. Whatever darkness existed in Elena's past, whatever secrets she kept, the love she had for her sons was real. And in the end, perhaps that was what mattered most. Not perfect parents, but loving ones. Not an unblemished history, but a commitment to a better future. The Rolls-Royce that had appeared in their lives 1 year ago, bringing complications and heartache, had gradually transformed from a symbol of disruption into just another vehicle that sometimes parked beside Mason's weathered truck. Different worlds had collided, adjusted, and finally begun to merge. Not seamlessly, not without friction, but with growing harmony. And as Mason watched Eleanor high-five Lily over some board game triumph, saw the twins' faces alight with the simple joy of family togetherness, he allowed himself to believe that perhaps the darkest chapters of their unusual story were behind them, with brighter pages waiting to be written. 5 years had passed since Elena's return in the Rolls-Royce. The twins were now 14, Lily 19, and away at college on a geology scholarship, funded in part by Elena's connections and in part by Mason's unwavering support of his daughter's dreams. The cabin had expanded again, a proper addition with 2 bedrooms, giving the growing boys their own spaces. Mason's career had advanced too. He now directed nursing services at Pinecrest Hospital, a position that allowed him more regular hours and better pay. Life had found its balance, the once awkward co-parenting arrangement mellowing into something that worked for all of them. On a crisp October morning, Mason stood on the porch watching Elena's car approach. Not the Rolls-Royce anymore. She'd traded it for a practical SUV years ago, claiming the luxury car was impractical for mountain living. It was one of many subtle shifts she'd made, adjusting her life to better mesh with the family that had formed without her. Today was special, the twins' birthday, their 15th just around the corner. The investigation into Victor's death had eventually been closed. Insufficient evidence to proceed, the medical examiner's concerns officially dismissed as laboratory error. Mason had chosen to let go of his suspicions, not because they were resolved, but because holding on to them served no purpose in building the future they all wanted for the boys. "You're deep in thought," Elena remarked, joining him on the porch. She'd arrived early to help prepare for the birthday dinner. "What's on your mind?" Just thinking about how far we've come, Mason replied honestly. She looked different now than when she'd first returned. The designer clothes remained, but they were less ostentatious, more practical for mountain life. Her hair was shorter, often pulled back in a casual ponytail. Even her jewelry had simplified. Today, wearing only a simple pendant necklace that Mason recognized as a gift from the twins last Christmas. Eleanor nodded, understanding in her eyes. They'd developed a comfortable shorthand over the years, able to communicate volumes in brief exchanges, from a blizzard rescue to birthday cakes. Who would have thought? Not me, he admitted with a smile. Definitely not me. Inside, the twins were setting the table, arguing good-naturedly about something that had happened at school. They'd grown tall, Noah already surpassing Mason in height, Ethan not far behind. Their personalities had continued to diverge. Noah, outgoing and ambitious, already talking about medical school like his adoptive father. Ethan, quieter, artistic, his room filled with sketches and paintings that showed remarkable talent. "Mom! Dad!" "Noah's being annoying again," Ethan called, the complaint delivered with the easy confidence of a child who knows he is loved, secure in his place within this unconventional family. "Standard operating procedure, then?" Elena replied, winking, and Noah, who feigned outrage. "I'm just saying," Noah defended himself, setting down a stack of plates, "that Ms. Peterson's rules for the science fair are completely arbitrary. Ethan shouldn't get extra time just because his project involves painting. It's a visual representation of cellular division," Ethan corrected with the long-suffering patience of someone who has explained this multiple times. "It's still science." Mason and Elena exchanged amused glances, the silent communication of parents who've weathered countless such arguments. "Both projects sound impressive to me," Mason offered diplomatically. "Noah's research on local water quality and Ethan's artistic approach to biology, you're both going to knock everyone's socks off." The doorbell rang, announcing the arrival of Abuela Rosa, now in her 70s but still spry, still an essential part of their extended family. She bustled in carrying a large gift bag in each hand, waving away Mason's attempts to help. "I'm old, not helpless," she chided, setting down her packages to embrace the twins. "Feliz cumpleaños, my handsome boys." The kitchen gradually filled with people. A few of the twins' closest friends, Mason's colleagues from the hospital, Elena's assistant from the charitable foundation she'd established in Pinecrest. The cabin that had once felt too small for just Mason and Lily now expanded somehow to accommodate all these lives that had become interconnected over the years. Mason watched as Elena moved seamlessly through the space, opening cupboards with the familiarity of someone who belonged there. In many ways, she did belong, not as his partner in the romantic sense Lily had once predicted, but as his partner in raising these remarkable boys. His phone chimed with a video call, and the gathered crowd quieted as Lily's face appeared on the screen, beaming from her dorm room 3 states away. "Happy birthday, you annoying brats," she called affectionately, and the twins crowded around the phone, the 3 siblings falling immediately into their familiar, loving banter. "How's the geology rock star?" Noah asked, earning groans from everyone for the terrible pun. "Buried in work," Lily replied with her own grin, "but I wouldn't miss wishing my brothers happy birthday. The care package should arrive tomorrow. Mom, help me arrange it." Mason noticed Elena's slight smile at Lily's casual use of mom. It had happened gradually over the years, Lily's initial wariness melting into acceptance, and finally a genuine bond. Elena had never tried to replace Lily's birth mother in her memories, but she had become a maternal figure in her own right, there for advice about college applications, relationship troubles, the transition to adulthood. The darkness that had once shadowed their relationship, the suspicions, the secrets, the unspoken questions about Victor's death, had gradually receded, never completely gone, but no longer defining their interactions. They had chosen, both of them, to focus on creating a future rather than dissecting the past. The party continued into the evening. Cake was cut, presents were opened amid laughter and teasing. Mason caught Elena watching the twins with that particular expression she sometimes wore, a mixture of love and lingering regret for the years she'd missed. He understood it better now, that complicated emotion, having come close to losing them himself. Later, after the guests had departed and the boys were engrossed in their new video game, Mason found Elena standing alone on the back deck, gazing at the stars that had witnessed their entire complicated journey. "Thank you," she said without turning, "for saving them that night, for loving them when I couldn't be there, for sharing them with me when I returned." Mason leaned against the railing beside her. "They're amazing kids. I couldn't have done otherwise." "You could have," Elena corrected gently. "Many would have. You chose compassion over bitterness, cooperation over conflict. Our sons are who they are because of the example you set. Our sons." The words no longer stung as they once had. The possessiveness had transformed into something more generous. Shared joy, shared pride, shared responsibility. "We both did what we thought was best for them," Mason said. "That's all any parent can do." Elena was quiet for a moment. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't left them with you, if I'd taken them with me into hiding?" The question surprised him. They rarely spoke directly of that night anymore. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but then I look at them now, how happy and well-adjusted they are, and I think maybe things happened exactly as they needed to." A soft smile touched Elena's lips. The universe's strange wisdom. She turned to face him fully, the moonlight catching the silver strands that had begun to appear in her dark hair. "I got a call yesterday from Boston." Mason felt a flicker of the old tension. Boston meant Victor, meant the past they rarely discussed. "Oh!" "The last of Victor's estate has finally been settled. The boys' trust funds are secure, completely, separate from Winters International. They'll have resources for whatever path they choose, but not so much that it defines them." She paused. "I've made sure my will reflects the same philosophy. Enough to support them, not enough to corrupt them." Mason nodded, understanding what she wasn't saying, that she had thought carefully about how to protect the twins from the darkness that had touched her own life among the wealthy and powerful. "They'll use it wisely," he said. "They've been raised to value the right things." "Because of you," Elena acknowledged. "The best thing I ever did was leave them in your hands that night, even if it was the hardest choice I've ever made." From inside, Noah called out, "Hey, are we watching this movie or what?" "Coming," Mason replied, turning toward the door. Elena put a hand on his arm, stopping him briefly. "Mason," her voice held a note he couldn't quite identify. "I need you to know, whatever you might have thought about Victor's death, whatever suspicions you might still harbor, I've never regretted the choices I made to protect our sons. Not one of them." Their eyes met in the darkness, and Mason saw in hers neither confession nor denial, just the fierce love of a mother who would move heaven and earth for her children. "I know," he said simply, and found that he did. 15 years ago, if someone had told him that a blizzard would bring twins into his life, that he would adopt them, fight for them, and eventually share them with the mother who had left them behind, he would have called it impossible. Yet here they were, living proof that family could be found in the most unexpected circumstances, forged in the crucible of hardship and strengthened by the choice to overcome differences for the sake of those who mattered most. They rejoined. The boys inside, settling onto the couch for the traditional birthday movie night. Ethan had chosen a classic sci-fi film, one they'd watched together a dozen times before. As the familiar opening credits rolled, Noah passed around bowls of popcorn, the comfortable routine of a family tradition well established. "Hey, Mom," Ethan said suddenly, "remember that story you told us about when we were little and I was afraid of thunderstorms? How you would draw pictures of what the clouds were thinking to make me less scared?" Elena's expression softened with surprise and pleasure. "You remember that? You couldn't have been more than 3. "I remember the pictures," Ethan said. "Not sure if it's an actual memory or just because you've told me about it, but I can see them in my mind." Mason watched the interplay of emotions. On Elena's face, joy at this unexpected connection to her son's early years, the precious confirmation that not everything had been lost during their separation. "I could draw some for you now if you want," she offered, a hint of playfulness in her voice. Ethan rolled his eyes with teenage exaggeration. "Mom, I'm not 3 anymore." "Could have fooled me," Noah teased, dodging the pillow Ethan threw in response. Mason caught Elena's eye over the boys' heads, sharing a silent moment of understanding. These small miracles, their sons remembering fragments of their early childhood, feeling secure enough to tease and argue, calling 2 different parents Mom and Dad without confusion or conflict, were the rewards of their difficult, complicated journey. Life wasn't perfect. There were still difficult days, disagreements about parenting, the occasional resurfacing of old wounds. But sitting here with Ethan and Noah arguing over popcorn between them, with Elena laughing at their antics, Mason knew with absolute certainty that they had built something precious from the most unlikely beginning. And that, perhaps, was the greatest rescue story of all. Not just Mason saving twins from a blizzard, but all of them, together, rescuing and rebuilding a family that had nearly been lost. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.